Hi there, welcome back to the studio. So, today we're going to talk a bit about acoustics and also studio spaces, creative spaces. Whoa, creative spaces. So, yeah, some of you are interested in knowing a bit more about, acoustics in my studio and also about the studio itself. So, let's just put these together in one wholesome, enlightening educational video experience. So basically what I've done is I've collected some old photos and some videos that I found on some old hard drives where I've got pictures of old studio spaces and a little bit of video on when I started designing this studio space. And so we'll go on a little journey through this content with like a little slideshow on the computer. And I'll give a little bit of a background and a bit of a story and talk about the studio spaces that I've been in over the years. Sounds exciting. Pour yourself a nice cup of tea. Let's get into it. Okay, so first up is this isn't my first studio. I had a journey before I decided to get devoted to music as a life path. I had, just the classic computer and speakers in a bedroom. Maybe a really old, crappy MIDI controller. And I sort of had a few places I was living at in Sydney where I had a setup of just having a little creative zone at my computer somewhere in a corner or in a bedroom. And, I wasn't really focused on music as my journey at that point, even though I knew that was coming. So the studio didn't take priority. But when I left Sydney to focus solely on music, I then started to always have a creative space that was devoted to my creativity, to the music. I don't have a photo of the very first studio that I made when I did leave the city and focused on music, but it was a beautiful little old 2-bedroom cottage out on some acreage with cow paddocks around next to a little creek south of Sydney, a couple of hours out in the bush. And it was a magical little zone. It was a little cold, a little damp, a little moldy. But it was in that space that I decided to, actually dive into the world of acoustics and just do a little bit of treatment on the room. I got to reading and, there's so much information now on acoustics on the internet, far more than before. But what I did build in that very initial space was these colorful bass traps you see in the corner here, which is basically just insulation in a wooden frame with a really thick carpet that I cut up. There's another one there on the left side, and I think there's one more at the back. So I had 3 of those in the corners. They weren't huge, so they weren't probably the best bass traps. Then I made some of these, little floating cloud things on the walls. This one here was made with, old school 70s shag pile rug material. So that would have been a good high frequency, mid frequency absorber. And basically, this studio here, this is my second studio space. And this was in the Blue Mountains in a little rental property in the town of Katoomba, which is a really magical mountain town. And this is a really great place to start really devoting deeply to my sound. You could walk out the front door and be on a bushwalking trail into the wilderness and lose yourself for days if you wanted to. So that nature has always been close by. Basically, you learn in acoustics, and I learned this at audio engineering school, that, sound bounces around the room, it flies out of the speaker and it bounces around. Now, the places that are the most important to treat are the first reflections. So wherever the sound is coming out of the speaker and hitting the wall and the roof and the floor first, that's the area you sort of want to deal with immediately to stop weird things happening in the space. So you'll see as we go through each of these rooms, it's kind of a theme. The sound curves around behind the speakers as well and reflects off the walls, so it's good to have treatment behind the speakers. Bass traps in the corners, nice thickness, thicker than these ones. I'll show you what my bass traps have evolved into now. This was a rectangular room, which was pretty long. Let's see. Oh, there's a close-up view. Some MIDI controllers. This is an old Korg MS-10 that I got given from this epic old-school glam rocker guy in Sydney. And it was my first analog synth, and it featured quite heavily on some of that earlier Merkaba and Kalia stuff. But funnily enough, after I left Australia in 2013, it was many years until I used an analog synth again. So there's a broader picture of the room, and nice couch at the back for hanging out. But yeah, it was a good space. The KRK speakers are pretty budget by today's comparison, but the old V6s, they definitely had a nice sound for a low price speaker, and I learnt the sound of those speakers really well, and that's the most important thing. You can be using Logitech computer speakers, and if you learn the sound of those over many years of practice, you can dial in a mix as good as any. That's definitely something to be aware of. You might have a very bare room, and that's just what you've got, and that's totally fine. I have stories of coming into production spaces of certain artists who have become, quite popular and famous. And when they were starting out and writing some of their original material, the studio was basically a bare room. I remember one guy's studio being in a hallway, a completely untreated hallway, and the music he was making with that really bare bones setup, a laptop on a bare table in a bare hallway in Tel Aviv in Israel. And I was amazed when I saw, his space and the fact that his production already at that early stage was really quite good. And but he proceeded to tell me that he used analyzers religiously to make sure that everything was leveling well. He had good teachers, other producers there in Israel, that taught him some really good techniques to help him get a good sound regardless of the listening environment. Another good example is you can look at the techno producer Matador. He has maybe it's on Telecom Electric Beats channel. But yeah, Matador Studio, his studio in Ireland, it's full of gear. There's a lot of gear in there that's going to help break the sound up. But the guy's, got massive barefoot monitors, and it's literally no acoustic treatment in the whole room. And as he says towards the end of the video, he just knows his sound of his speakers and what he's doing that well. He's been doing it for decades, obviously. But yeah, you can get that confidence in your setup and not really have to fret over getting a really acoustically treated room. As we'll see as we go on, I've had some rooms that were treated too much or were just a bad room, and no matter how much I treated them, it didn't really help. So yeah, I will say that you can totally do it whatever way you want, however it makes you happy, whatever inspires you. And there's also a really good balance between not enough and too much, and actually using a little bit of acoustic treatment in the right places in your room can go a long way and make the experience of producing on speakers in that room a whole lot nicer. So yeah, here it is, the old studio. All right, let's move on. So after that studio space, I had another one that was where I started writing Open Ancient Eyes. And it was in the back of a tiny little caravan up in Byron Bay, up in the wilderness up there, like 45 minutes from the nearest town, right out in the bush. And Eve and I were living in a tent, and I had the studio space in a caravan, and there was an outdoor kitchen next to the caravan, and there were snakes and spiders, and it was so wild, and there was waterfalls, and it was an epic time in our lives. And I wrote some really awesome music in this tiny little box, and I got a few chunks of foam from Ben Templestep, and I put them in there. But in that experience, it wasn't really about having, a big studio space to work in. It was just about creating the music that had come from this vision that Eve and I had been working on. So yeah, the Caravan Studio was between this one and this next one. So this one is this is in Santa Cruz, California, and this was my first studio outside of Australia. I left Australia in 2013, and then by the end of 2013, after our first European tour, we ended up in Santa Cruz. We decided to settle there for a moment, and we were looking for a place to live, and the guys at Third Eye Pine Cones had actually had 2 rooms open up in their big house, and they said, hey, come and live with us. And so we put the bedroom upstairs above this room, and this is the studio room. This was a nice room because it was a long rectangular room, and it had these walk-in closets here that I kept open, which kind of helped break up the bass. And I think I just put curtains here. I don't even think there's any bass traps in the corners here, but you can see that I made sure I stopped the high frequency reflections on this piece of glass on this window here. Something on the roof to break up the sound there. Yeah, there wasn't a great deal of treatment in this room, just mostly fabrics to help just take away some of the ringing of the top end. And yeah, this is where I finished Open Ancient Eyes, in this little room. And yeah, it was a great time. The Pinecone House was so hectic with all their missions to festivals every weekend and all the kids coming in and out, and bless their hearts, they were an epic bunch. But overall, it was just too chaotic for us, so we had to move. And we moved a couple of miles away in a little valley outside of Santa Cruz. And this is the studio space that I created there. So I took some time and I started making some acoustic paneling. Now, the acoustic paneling that I make, I'll show you a picture towards the end of the slideshow, how I do that. And it's just a very basic standard issue DIY acoustic panel design. You can find so many videos on how to make these online. It's literally a wood frame with a bit of reinforcing and a slab of either thick foam or some insulation, some rock wool insulation. There's a specific brand called Safe and Sound you get at Home Depot. And that's the stuff. You just whack it in this frame and put a nice fabric cover on it, and bam, you got yourself a panel. This was beautiful in the valley here with the little creek and big Douglas firs and redwood trees. Nice and inspiring. And as you can see, wood, lots of wood, nice deep red. We painted this wall. I really love using rich, warm colors to just sort of give that more vibey experience in the studio. Most of the time I'm focused looking into these weird electronic screen things here, and it doesn't matter. It could be it could be a bare room, it could be whatever space around. I'm so focused in here. But what I did realize is that the vibe overall of everything around adds to the feeling I get when I walk into the room. I want to walk into the studio and just feel this space of creativity. a zone that just makes me feel good when I'm inside it. So yeah, I had lots of crystals and trinkets and treasures and plants. Always, I love the vines, growing the vines. I got one in here. So yeah, the Santa Cruz Studio number 2. Yeah, well, what else is there to say? Yeah, I upgraded to the Dynaudio speakers. They were definitely nicer than the KRKs. Really crispy top end. But yeah, when I moved to Hawaii, a couple of years after being in this space, yeah, I sold these to the guy who lived there. Yeah, what little tea station. Oh yeah, that's important, your little tea station there. Yeah, so this was a nice spot. And actually, I got on the phone with an Israeli guy who was really good with acoustic treatment because I had some issues in the room. And he taught me how to take a basic mic and do EQ sweeps with a free app called Room EQ Wizard to just kind of map out where the frequencies are phasing and where they're kind of overwhelming. And so that helped me understand a little bit of the way sound works in a room, and then you can treat it accordingly. So, oh yeah, this is a classic studio setup here. One of my finest, actually. Yeah, on the road, sometimes you just need to grab a few things and put them together in a room just so you can jam out. And there was periods there, one time as long as 14 months where I didn't have a studio because I was traveling with Eve nonstop for 14 months. And this was one of the moments I had where I grabbed things out of storage because I had a little spare room space and I just needed to, create. And yeah, we'll have a look at another portable setup in a moment. So we ended up in Hawaii in a big house, and actually this one here is the first room I set up a studio in this house. This house was big, old retreat center, no one was living in it, and the guy just wanted someone in it. He said I could just put a studio in whichever room I want. There was like 12 bedrooms. So I chose a room, and it turned out that the room was just kind of boxy and it didn't really work. And I went overkill with the acoustic treatment. As you can see, I built myself a bunch of panels and some bass traps, and I went to town and treated this whole room as best as I could, and it still ended up being a really bad sounding room. I ended up making it too dead almost, but the bass was the issue. It was so phasey. I just got these focal trios, so I didn't really know their sound as well. So it was a challenging room, and I ended up actually moving it to another room in the house, which had a bit more of a rectangular shape and a higher roof in one part. And this was a slightly better sounding room. It was good. So yeah, there was some challenging times in that house. And even though I treated things acoustically, it still didn't mean that I was going to have the greatest sound. I had some really bad mixes come out during this time. But as you'll discover on your journey, sometimes a bad mix is just your headspace and the stress of life and all these other things. So after we left this house, we went on that marathon 14 months tour, and this was my little setup for carrying around in a backpack. And I set this up in Africa, I set it up in Mauritius, I set it up in Ireland, and yeah, I could just have a little creative zone on the go. The Rolly Seaboard was a very fun tool to use. I think I'd like another one of these MPE devices. It's really fun playing these. And yeah, that was I wrote some of the early Griffin Cloud came out of this setup. There's another shot of it. Oh, let's go back. Yeah, so simple, easy, and helping me get my creative juices flowing when I'm on the road. It was very hard to write music on the road, to be honest. Being in the chaos of always moving to different lands and different zones, and yeah, you're going through a lot of transitions, so to get focused on a project is quite challenging. And also working in headphones all the time on the road actually ended up being something that I loved. I didn't enjoy writing music in headphones, but when I had no other choice and I learnt it, I was actually grateful to learn how to write music in headphones, because now I use it as a mix reference tool. Okay, so we ended up in this house that we're currently in at the end of the 14-month tour. And being a share house at that stage, you know, my only option was to set the studio up in the bedroom. So behind the camera here is the bed where even I would sleep. And it was the first time having a studio in the bedroom since I was in my 20s, and it wasn't fun. It's I really feel, if you can, to separate sleeping and creating, because sometimes I just lay in bed thinking about the studio, which is right next to me, and not sleeping, which might be a good thing, but I ended up being very tired after that. So yeah, this studio, the room was kind of perfect. I barely treated it, and acoustically it was really good from the start. There was a door that I kept open in the back right side of the room, and that meant that the bass would all go into the ensuite bathroom and get trapped in that bathroom. So I had a really good sound right here. So that was a fun little spot. This is where I finished Guy and Code. Let's see, I started Guy and Code in this room, in the old house in Hawaii, and then I finished it in this room. And then our flatmates left and we took over the whole house. And it was time to move this studio over to its dedicated room. And so now we're going to look at some videos and photos I created back when I was first building this studio in this room that we're in right now. Hi there, welcome to my studio build. Making a new studio in this house, and thought like it'd be a good idea to document the process. Maybe there's a little bit of inspiration to be found. So this is the room, very empty and echoey right now. It's undergoing painting. This is the old color there, very bleak and cold and uninspiring, and so we're gonna paint it all nice and warm and yellow and earthy, get those creative inspirational juices flowing. So this is the room I'm working with. It's pretty decent size. It's got a nice sloped roof up there, and it's gonna be a nice studio. So I'll take you on this journey and show you how I build the bass traps and where I place everything, and it's should be fun. So you can see, looking around the room, just standard room, basic 4 walls, floor. I took the doors off the wardrobes at the back so that they could help, break up the sound. And having the high ceiling is an absolute bonus. That's the one thing that makes this room sound really good. With these odd angles here, it helps break up the sound, and especially the bass. So for me, building the studio is an integral part of creating and dialing in a creative space that just feels really, really good to be in and work in. It's a studio. You're going to spend a lot of time in here, sometimes 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, classic 9 to 5. But it's all about color and space and feel. So when I walk into this room, it's going to be a place that just oozes creative inspiration, a place that feels really good to be in. So yeah, let's get cracking. Another layer of paint coming up, and the idea is that we don't rush this part. It's very easy to rush these things because you just want to get to this finished product of having this mothership all set up. So take it easy, get some nice beats happening, tasty beverage, and enjoy the ride. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the painting of the studio is it's almost like a ritual for me to come in and change the vibe of the whole space with colors that really inspire me in the realm of creativity. I love the warm, earthy tones, and it just transformed this room. This room felt so cold and bleak before, with that really kind of horrible off-white that it was. And so to put these warmer colors over the whole room and make one of the walls a sort of an accent wall, it's just created a whole new life in the space. As you can see out the windows, there's lots of nature. Awesome. Having a studio with nature outside has always been a big thing on my priority list for studios. I think one day I want to build a studio where I can press a button on my desk and all the walls go down. So all of a sudden I'm just in nature. That would be the best, the ultimate. Yeah, the back of the room behind me is, there's big bass traps in these corners now. There's a bunch of foam up here. I just know that the bass is going to come in here and gather. And so that's a really good spot to treat back there. There is still a bit of gathering of bass in the back of the room. So I actually, since my sub pack has been broken, I've been walking back into this back corner of the room to feel the bass in my body, so that I can get a really good idea of how the bass is sitting. Okay, so here is just the basic DIY trap that is sort of a mid and high frequency absorber. This one here is the one that's floating above my head. I just put some chains in it and hung it from the roof. It's super basic, super simple. You could even find some scrap wood and make one of these. And there it is, the insulation that's inside the frame with material over the top of it. There it is. There's another one with some of the fabric on it. I wanted to, continue with that earthy vibe, and so I found this fabric, a big roll of it on eBay. Super simple, super easy, and super fun. And so the bass traps, I drew a little template on the canvas just to kind of get an idea of the size of the bass trap and how it would fit in the corner of the room. And it's basically a wooden frame, as you can see here. A wooden frame with these layers of foam, and this point here is the point that goes in the corner, so that between the back of the very back in the corner and where the foam is, there's gap, so that the frequencies can get absorbed once and then bounce off the wall and get absorbed twice. I haven't done anything here according to any scientific analysis of the room or of the absorption, coefficients of the materials and such. I've really just done everything just intuitively, just from what I know over the years works. So yeah, there's just some basic string that's holding this together, but once I put fabric over it, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 thick layers of insulation there. And then it gets the material put over the top of it and staple gunned to the frame, nice and tight. And then you put it in the corner and bam, look at that, beautiful. And these are very functional bass traps. They work better than any bass traps I've built before. And without them in this room, the bass would be a lot more hectic. And then up on the roof, fortunately this roof is wood, so it's really easy to suspend things from. And because of the slope here, like I mentioned earlier, acoustically, this is a great shape to work with because it already sounds nice in the room. And yeah, there's some floaties up there, some, little clouds floating in the sky. And I just sort of space them around. The sound is going to come. Speakers are on the left side. The sound's going to come and hit this. This is protecting all this area up here from reflecting. Yeah, it's just sort of putting things in places where it feels good. And in the back of the room, you can see the big bass traps in the corners, some foam over this one flat shiny surface, which is right behind me. So that would be a definite reflection spot. And then we ended up with this cozy studio. And this big acoustic panel on this window here, I actually ended up taking it away because I wanted the window. I wanted the natural light. And for me, that was an important compromise, to be able to have that ability to look out into the nature and to have the light and all that vibe of nature come into the room without it being blocked. And, there's enough gear here that my speakers don't reflect too much off this window here, because glass is like one of the worst things for the high frequencies. So here it is, the final mothership experience. And will this be my last studio? Probably not. But it's definitely my best, my most favorite, my coziest, and one that inspires me more than all the others combined. Yeah, a few other things worth mentioning. Yeah, the wood floor here is really important. You could put down carpet, but I wanted to be able to roll around on the chair. So that was just the vibe of the wood. It looks nice. I didn't notice that there was too much of an issue with the floor reflecting. But yeah, I've basically covered, the roof here, these areas up here, the bass traps most importantly. This big chunk here that's behind my computer monitor. That just helps with some of the sound coming back from the speakers and not reflecting too much off these windows. Yeah, so that's it. And, other than the acoustics and the vibe, it's just really about what makes you happy. Whatever inspires you. I just encourage, inspiration. Like, create a space for yourself that inspires you. It doesn't matter how simple it is, This was, like I said, this was my second studio space, this little thing here. And just with the few things I could pull together with the tiny amount of money I had back then, I made something that felt really inspiring. And, eventually it evolved into this, which is a happy place, a place I walk into and I just feel ready to create. I feel inspired by the colors. I love the feeling of having my plant in here. I do want to get some more plants, to be honest. The colors, the vibe, I think that's about it. Create yourself a space that inspires you. Do whatever you can with whatever you've got to make your creative space special to you. And that can mean anything. Whatever that means for you, whatever makes you happy, go for it. So awesome. I hope you've enjoyed this journey into my creative spaces. It's definitely been a journey looking back on all of that. Wow. A real journey. But, at the end of the day, it's the journey of creativity. It's about you evolving. It's about your space evolving. It's about your art evolving. That's what we're here to do. We're here to create and be creative and be inspired. So, hope you've enjoyed this journey. See you in the next one.